Hello and welcome to today's video. This time we're looking at an article concerning artificial intelligence and the way that it's affecting the creative industries. As usual, you can read the article with me and you can also download the text, which is available from the link in the video description below. And we'll also be looking at some interesting words. Reading is, of course, one of the best ways you can expand your vocabulary, so I do encourage you to do it as often as possible. And of course, go back and look at some of my other videos. And if you want to concentrate on some words in particular, you can skip to the relevant part of the video by skipping to the chapter, which is in the video description. So let's get on with it and look at the first paragraph. In a legal battle that has sent shockwaves through the worlds of literature and artificial intelligence, George R.R. Martin, the renowned author behind the epic fantasy series A Song of Ice and Fire, which inspired the hit HBO show Game of Thrones, has filed a lawsuit against OpenAI, the creator of ChatGPT. The lawsuit alleges that ChatGPT infringes upon Martin's copyright and poses a threat to the creative landscape by generating content that resembles his own work. So the first word we have highlighted here is shockwave. So this is a noun, and it generally refers to a sound, a very loud sound, that is generated by compression of a medium, whether that be water or more commonly air. If we think of an explosion, if there's an explosion, then that compresses the air and generates a wave that propagates from the source of the explosion. And another case where we might see a shockwave could be an object traveling very quickly through the air. For example, an aircraft. There was a very famous aircraft called Concorde, which was operational for many years. And this commercial airline was the only one that was capable of traveling at a speed greater than the speed of sound, which is usually referred to as Mach 1. When an aircraft travels through the air greater than the speed of sound, it generates a shockwave because it compresses the air so much. And this shockwave can be heard on the ground as a large booming sound. In fact, it's commonly known as a sonic boom. This was actually one of the problems of Concorde, why it couldn't be more widely used, apart from the fact it was very expensive to operate. It also, the generation of the shockwave meant that it couldn't really fly over populated areas because of the noise that it generated. So in this case, obviously, it's used figuratively. We're not talking about a bomb or an aircraft generating a shockwave. We're talking about this legal battle. It has created waves. It has disturbed people in a way and made them sit up and pay attention to what's happening. So let's move on to the second word here. We have renowned. This is an adjective, and it's often used to talk about people who have done something important that everybody knows about. So we can talk about a renowned scientist. Probably the most renowned scientist in the world would be somebody like Einstein or Newton. Those names are renowned. Everybody knows about them. Those people did something very important, very impressive, that generated their fame. And in this case, we're talking about the renowned author. He's renowned, he's famous, he's well known, simply because he wrote a very popular series of books that were used as the basis for an equally popular TV series called Game of Thrones. So that's the reason why he became renowned or famous. The third word here we have is the verb to allege. The noun is allegation. If you make an allegation, that means that you are making a statement, an accusatory statement, suggesting or implying that somebody has done something. In the legal context, for example, if you believe that somebody has committed a crime, then you would allege that. You would make an allegation, perhaps to the police, and then the police would have to investigate and discover proof that can be used to prosecute that person. So an allegation doesn't necessarily automatically mean guilt, because an allegation can be made without concrete evidence. Obviously, that allegation has to be tested in court, in a court of law, which is what will happen in this case. So the allegation is alleging that the AI is copying the author's work, and that obviously will go to court and it will be tested, and in the end we'll discover whether that allegation has any truth to it or not. So that brings us to the fourth word, which is to infringe upon. So when it says that ChatGPT infringes upon Martin's copyright, basically we are thinking about a similar concept to intrude. And imagine an intruder. An intruder is somebody who is going into a place where they shouldn't be. They have no right to be there. They're trespassing. So somebody who breaks into my house, that person in English is called a burglar, would be an intruder. They're also infringing my right to privacy and to legal protection. So infringe in a similar sense means you're intruding, but it's more commonly used when we're talking about legal rights. For example, if a company infringes a copyright on a product, it basically means they're copying that product. They're making a product that is very similar to the original. And obviously that's protected by legal institutions. We have trademarks, copyright laws that protect intellectual property and try to stop this kind of infringement. And that is what's happened here, that the allegation is that the AI is intruding upon, infringing those copyright laws, and we'll see what happens in the court case. Moving on to the next paragraph. The lawsuit contends that ChatGPT's ability to generate text that closely resembles Martin's writing style and storytelling has the potential to undermine Martin's intellectual property rights and compromise the distinctiveness of his literary world. Martin himself expressed his concerns in a recent statement saying, "I have spent decades crafting the world of Westeros and its characters, and it's deeply troubling to see an AI model generating content that mimics my style and storytelling." First word we have highlighted here is potential. You can see this is a noun used in combination with the definite article. And when we talk about potential, we are essentially referring to a person or an object or a situation's ability to develop in the future. So let's focus first on a person. Imagine that we see a young footballer who's just starting in their career. But when we watch them, we can see that they play really, really well, and they have a lot of skill. But we imagine that in the future, they'll be even better. They will be even more skilled. Perhaps they will grow to be one of the most famous footballers in the world. Well, in that case, we would say that this young player has a lot of potential. This word is also used in the scientific terminology. If we talk about potential energy, that refers to the energy that an object has to perform work at some point in the future. The simplest example of this would be gravitational potential energy. So if you lift an object, you're doing work, and that energy is kind of stored, if you like, in the object. And if I let the object fall, then that energy is released and turned into kinetic energy. This concept is used to generate electricity when a dam is constructed across a river that stores the potential energy of the water. As the water is released It falls due to gravity and turns a turbine, and that turbine generates electrical energy. Electrical potential energy can be stored in batteries, which we use in all kinds of devices in the modern day world. So obviously in this case, what it's talking about here is the potential of this technology to weaken, undermine, damage his intellectual property rights. So he's saying basically that this situation could get worse for him. As the technology develops and grows and becomes more powerful, then the situation in the future would actually be even more complicated for authors. So let's move on to the next word. This is distinctiveness. Distinctiveness is a noun. The adjective is distinctive. If we add the suffix ness, we make the noun. So if we talk about something being distinctive, it means it's different. Perhaps if we talk about a person's dress, the way they dress is distinctive if it's not the same as other people. Maybe somebody who doesn't follow style, they prefer to make their own style. We would say they have a very distinctive sense of dress. An artist's style can be very distinctive if it's easily recognizable. If we think of a Van Gogh or a Picasso, just looking at that picture, immediately you know who the artist was because their style is very distinctive. Moving on to this word, craft. So crafting is traditionally referred to those kinds of trades which created something. For example, painting. If you were a blacksmith, you would create things out of metal. Or if you were a potter, you would craft things out of clay, make pots. But today it's more widely used to refer to hobbies. We call them handicrafts sometimes. So this can be any kind of creative pastime that involves some kind of skill. So perhaps you are very good at making jewelry, or perhaps you are very good at sewing, so you make clothes or accessories. In this case, he's talking about crafting the world of Westeros. So that is, he's using that word to imply that he's created this whole fantasy world and the characters that populate it. So he's not physically crafting anything, but still intellectually, he has been very creative. So let's move on to the last word, which is to mimic. If you mimic something, you're essentially copying it. And sometimes people are very good at copying other people's voices. They mimic their speech. And we call these people impressionists. Some people even make a career out of doing that. In fact, some birds can mimic human speech. Some parrots and other birds can copy human sounds and it appears that they are actually speaking, when really they don't understand what they're saying. Obviously, they're just copying the sounds that they hear, mimicking it. Another example of mimicry from nature could be certain insects' ability to mimic the appearance of leaves or parts of plants in order to camouflage themselves and protect them from predators. There are lots of different types, commonly called stick insects in English, because some of them do appear to be like sticks. Moving on to the next paragraph. OpenAI, the organization behind ChatGPT, has responded saying, "We believe that ChatGPT is a tool that empowers creators and writers by providing assistance and inspiration, and we stand firmly behind our commitment to promote responsible AI use." Legal experts suggest that this lawsuit could set a precedent in the intersection of AI and copyright law. It raises important questions about the boundaries of AI-generated content and the responsibility of AI creators to ensure their technology does not intrude upon existing intellectual property. Looking at the first word we have here, it's the noun inspiration. The verb is to inspire. That's a regular verb. So if we think about inspiration, what we are concerned with here is something that gives us the idea, the creative idea to do something, or perhaps the motivation to do something. If we think about artists, or for example musicians, when they write songs, often they base the subject of their songs on their life's experiences, so that we would say that their life story is the inspiration behind that song. And an artist, for example a painter, can be inspired equally by a person or by an event. Picasso, for example, was inspired to paint one of his most famous paintings, El Guernica, by the terrible events of the Spanish Civil War, when a village was bombed by aircraft, and he was inspired by that event to create this painting. People can also be inspired perhaps to do things that nobody else has ever done. Some people need inspiration in order to give them motivation to do things. For example, climbing a mountain, or exploring an area. And those kind of people who do that can often inspire others to copy them or to follow in their footsteps. So next we have the phrasal verb to stand behind. And this is an inseparable phrasal verb. So the object always goes after behind. And like most phrasal verbs, or a lot of them, you cannot really understand them simply by translating them. If we translate the verb to stand, we see that it refers to the vertical bodily position. When you stand up, right, you get to your feet. But this has nothing really to do with that. It's used in a very figurative way. If you stand behind somebody, essentially you're offering them your support, you're endorsing their point of view, and backing them up, to use another phrasal verb. So imagine that somebody, perhaps your boss, has made a controversial decision. Perhaps it's not popular, but you agree with him, or at least you're willing to offer him your support. So you would say you stand behind him. Equally, if the government of a country makes a very controversial decision, one that's perhaps not very popular, and there's a lot of protest, sometimes the government will change its mind and back down. Other times it will stand behind its decision and continue with that process. In this case, what it's saying is that the company behind the technology stands behind it and behind its commitment to promote its responsible use. So it is doubling down on that commitment, on that decision that it made, and it's not going to change its mind. And for that reason, we have this legal dispute. So moving on to the third word we have, it's a precedent. So this is a noun, and it's often used in combination with the verb to set. So when a precedent is set, it is essentially a guideline or a point of reference for the future. It's often used in legal terminology. So if a precedent is set in a legal case, that means that that judgment will be used as the basis for future judgments in a similar situation. One of the most famous legal precedents in the US was Roe versus Wade. This famous judgment, which established a woman's right to have a legal abortion, set a precedent for future court cases. It allowed judges to use that as a point of reference. We can also use precedent in the wider sense when there is a big disruptive change in society. I mean, think about the invention of the printing press in Europe in the 15th century. that set a precedent for the production and dissemination of information in a way that affected many levels of society. So after that point in time, everything was different, right? It led to a lot of other developments in the future. The next word we have here is boundary. Boundary. This is a noun. When we talk of boundaries, we talk about limits. So if we imagine an open field with animals in it, the animals can wander all over the place. Maybe the farmer wants to keep the animals in a specific location, so he sets a boundary around a specific area, usually by building a fence or a wall to contain those animals. So boundaries are limits. Think of countries. Countries have boundaries, more commonly called borders, which define the area of the state. And when you cross a boundary or border from one country into another, usually there's a legal process where you have to have your passport checked, etc. So there are some controls there. In this case, we're not talking about geographical boundaries, however, we're talking about legal boundaries. And obviously in law, the law sets limits on our behavior. And in this case, in terms of copyright, it sets a limit on what you can and cannot do creatively. You cannot copy other people's work because it's protected by law. So in this case, it's saying that the advent of AI is raising important questions or doubts about those established limits or boundaries, right? Because this technology is disruptive. It's something new. It's novel. It's without precedent. So therefore, maybe these boundaries have to be redefined through the legal process. So the final word we have here is intrude upon, to intrude upon. And in fact, this is quite simple because it's relatively simple to the other word we looked at in the previous paragraph, which was to infringe. I mentioned an intruder. As I said, an intruder is a person who goes into an area where they should not be. They are trespassing. So in a similar sense to infringe, it's saying that the technology should not intrude, it should not invade existing intellectual property. Moving on to the final paragraph, a copyright law expert at Harvard University commented on the case, saying, "This lawsuit highlights the complex issues surrounding AI-generated content and intellectual property. It's a clash between the traditional understanding of copyright and the evolving landscape of AI. The outcome of this case could have far-reaching implications for the future of creative AI. As the legal battle unfolds, it remains to be seen how the court will navigate the delicate balance between protecting an author's intellectual property and fostering innovation in the AI space." So firstly, we have the verb to highlight. This is a verb and a noun. In this case, we are talking about highlighting an issue. So this legal action is bringing attention, it's attracting attention to this issue. In a similar way, if I want to bring your attention to a particular word in this text, I highlight that word, like I have done here in yellow. So that's essentially what it means, to attract attention to a particular issue or subject. The second word we have is clash. Fundamentally, this word, this noun or verb, it's a regular verb, fundamentally it means that there is a conflict here. There's a clash of ideas, for example. If people disagree, if they start arguing, there's a clash. Equally, if people start fighting in a battle or a war, we can say there is a clash too. And in this case, it's referring to the clash, the conflict between the traditional understanding of copyright that has existed for perhaps 100 years or more, and the modern, evolving, new disruptive technology of AI, which is challenging that traditional view. So that's where we get this clash of ideas. The penultimate word for today is to unfold. And this is the antonym of fold. We use the prefix un to make that. And fold is a verb and a noun. And probably the easiest way of thinking about this is to think about a popular hobby. It comes from Japan originally. It's called origami, and this involves folding paper in order to make different shapes and forms. So essentially, when you fold something, you are making it smaller by bringing two extremes together. So if you fold a paper in half, it has 50% of the original area. And if something unfolds, then you're doing the opposite of that. You're revealing something. So in this sense, it's used figuratively to say, as a situation unfolds, as it becomes clearer, or as it develops, think of a flower. Okay, in the spring, the flowers develop and they unfold, they blossom, they open. So as this legal situation unfolds, as it develops, things will become clearer. Finally, we have the verb to foster. And this is an Old English word. Originally, it was etymologically connected to the verb to feed. As you may know, to feed means to provide food for. And it is conserving that sense in a way, because when you foster somebody, sometimes people foster children. That means that they look after them. They provide food and shelter and education. And you can also foster ideas. In a sense, you're nurturing and feeding those ideas. And in this case, the article is talking about how the court will balance those two contradictory ideas of protecting an author's intellectual property and at the same time allowing the AI to foster and nurture and allow to develop innovation in this technological area. So it has to find the balance between those two contrasting ideas. Okay, well, thank you very much for reading and listening, and I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, please subscribe to get notified of new videos in the future. Until next time, goodbye.